that. Listen. I've been hearing a lot lately about men don't talk, but in my experience, men do talk, just people aren't listening. So it's going to be me and a group of blokes discussing our struggles and victories through life. Warning, there may be some bad language, so apologies to all the mums, especially my own. Let's get going. Listen. Abin, yeah, this is the Black Country Blokes chewing the facts about mental health, disability and life in general. Here with me, Kev Dillon, and my partner in crime, as always, Lee Cadman. Now today we're going to be talking about law, really, and the rights that us blokes do have, especially around divorce and separation. So, again, you guys to introduce yourself in a few seconds, telling us about the wonderful work that you're doing over to Higgs. But as always, we'd like to start with our gratitude. And me and my Kate, my wife, it was our 10-year anniversary the other day. So we went to Birmingham, we had a lovely meal. We're lucky enough to go out for a meal. And yeah, I'm grateful for we've been with each other for 12 years, but 10 years happily married. Most of it happy anyway. What are you grateful for?
Oh, I had a fantastic appointment for work. There's a gentleman who'd had a stroke, and I took him around an electric wheelchair, and he's been in his manual wheelchair with someone pushing him now for almost just over a year. And he's been looking out his window. He's got these massive windows in his house where he can look out and see the bottom of his garden. But he's not been able to go down there on his own. And he's a gardener. He loves to potter in his shed and do all that. And he had this wheelchair, and he went out and managed to take it down there. And yeah, just be out there with no one else. And his son took me to the side after the appointment and just thanked me. And I just think it's days like that I really appreciate it. I'm sure you have days like that with your two jobs as well. That just make it not more worthwhile, because it's worthwhile doing anyway, but makes you appreciate it more, what you do.
There you go. What are you grateful for today? Who wants to kick it off?
I'll kick it off. I'm grateful for my family today. So my husband's still at work. Grateful for him and for my parents who have got my two kids this evening. So they're helping out.
We'll thank them as well. So
very grateful for my family and having them around me.
About yourself?
I think I'm probably grateful for working from home today. I was tired this week, so it's nice to just have a bit of a lie-in and not have to do the commute in the morning. So
especially with all the roadworks.
I'm grateful for that. Small mercies, but I'm grateful.
But that's why we start with a gratitude list, because we started off when we did our support group through the lockdown, and it was always, as your week been bloody terrible. Oh, well, and then we go, what are you grateful for? What have I got to be grateful for? Well, can you breathe? Can you swallow? When you get to the toilet, does it flush? And the small victories are often the biggest victories, because when they're taken away from you, it's surprising how rubbish your day is. It's remembering, even the darkest day, there's something, even if it's just you're alive and kicking. So, girls, who's going to start? What exactly do you do for Higgs?
Should I kick off then?
Kick off.
Your name
and job role.
So, my name's Rhian Gray. This is Sioned Fitt, and we're both lawyers. We work at Higgs and have worked at Higgs for a number of years in the family team. And Higgs is a law firm that's been around and been local to here. We're based up at the waterfront since 1875. And in all of that time, we've been working with individuals, businesses, families, and sort of growing with them and working with them and helping them with any legal problems that they've had. I've worked in family law now for, it's getting on for 15 years, thereabouts, and specialised in working with people who are either at the start of their relationship and working with their money and kind of protecting their wealth, or at the end of their relationships, dividing it once they've divorced or once they've left a cohabiting relationship. So that's me.
I mean, Higgs are great. I mean, they've raised money for us over the years, haven't they, doing the sponsored walk. And it's great, people back in the community. So for that, we're always grateful. How about yourself?
So I specialise in children matters. I've been at Higgs for 7 years, been in the law for 13 years. So I've done a mix. I've done 7 years of public law representing parents, and now I've done 7 years of private law representing parents, trying to help them resolve arrangements for their children after separation.
The separation is always tough, isn't it? And as we're saying off air, every coin's got two sides, doesn't it? And you often hear it from, like, in the pub or at work. And unfortunately, with a relationship comes feelings and emotions. And I hear it so much here. And Kev, she's had an affair, she's taken the house, and I can't see the kids. That's the emotion around the incident, isn't it? And we were talking about it off air, wasn't we? Saying, to you, she's the baddie, I'm the goodie. But the true fact is, the relationship has ended. Now, what we're going to do about it, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the tricky thing in our roles, really, because, you know, yes, we're here to advise people who come to us with the problems after the relationship breakdown, but you have to start with understanding the emotions and how they're feeling about that breakdown, because it can really colour their decision making, their thought processes, and it's trying to get to the bottom of that and work with the individual. We don't so much work for people, we really work with people, and try and make sure that we understand those emotions so that we can empower them to make the best choices for them following a separation. I think that's probably true in terms of the children as well, if not more important, actually.
Yeah, I think what's important is recognising that regardless of what your client might be saying to you about their version of events, as you say, there will always be another side to that coin. And what's really important in our roles is to not completely buy into what your client is telling you, because it would be so easy to lead them astray and give them the wrong advice if you took everything that they were telling you at face value. And I think what's really valuable about what we do to help people is to take a step back from that and say, well, okay, if that is true, and if, you know, she's had an affair, for example, or whatever the case may be, how does that impact on the children though? Does it impact on the children? Well, that might make it difficult for the two of you to sit down around the kitchen table and have a chat, or meet up for a coffee somewhere and try and have a conversation about the children, because the emotions are so raw. The reality is, does it mean that the children shouldn't get the opportunity to spend time with her or him, either parent, grandparents, uncles, aunts, whoever it may be? The answer to that will almost always be no. It doesn't mean that, and it shouldn't mean that. And it's about helping the parents to find a way to, you know, not ignore those issues, because we can't pretend like they're not there and that people aren't hurt and are feeling pain and resentment, etc. But putting them into one field, into one box to deal with over here, and separately, how do we deal with the child arrangements? And sometimes I feel separating those things off can be really, really helpful, if we can.
So I think that's when it's a criminal thing. Mommy and daddy aren't in love anymore. We're not going to live together. But it's when the children are weaponised, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when, once again, there's bad mummies and bad daddies, but it's when they want to be in that child's life. There's no risk of harm, no risk. And you're thinking, it's then cruel when they're not allowed to see that person.
Yeah.
And I think that's when once again, the feelings, you have no right to take away that. Our relationship should stay strong, even though our relationship has dissolved.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what I tend to find, which is why we're now offering a specific service around fathers' rights, because in my experience, what I find a lot of is fathers in particular coming to speak to me and not really understanding what their rights and responsibilities, and those two things go hand in hand, what their rights actually are. So it's always helpful to put a father on the right footing by saying, well, actually, legally, you're on a level playing field. No one's got any higher rights than anyone else. So now we've put that to bed. Let's talk about the practicalities. What can we do to try and agree this amicably if we can? And that's always the starting point.
Why do you think there's like him and when I see it, it's always the father that seems to be fighting to see their children? Why do you think that is that correct, or is that just kind of what's put out there?
Well, I think, as you were saying, I mean, that's really the reasons why we've had a focus, and Sioned's had a focus on fathers' rights, because there's a need there. There's a lack of understanding about what fathers' roles, rights and responsibilities are.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of fathers coming to me and saying, well, she is mum and she has told me she is mum, and so this is what's happening. And I have to try and unpick that a bit and sort of look behind that and explain why that doesn't make any sense. So that's one reason. I think another reason that I typically come across is it's the age-old father is the breadwinner, mother is the homemaker, and those roles still being quite prevalent in society. And so I think there's a lot of, you know, mum will stay at home, take extended maternity leave, she might do a part-time job, and this isn't in all cases, but in a lot of cases this is the way the family is structured. And so I think when it comes to a separation, there might be guilt around, you know, father wanting to spend more time with the children and what that means in terms of mother's role. If she's been mother and perhaps has done a part-time job, but her whole existence has been fulfilling that role as mother, then you can almost understand why it might make you feel quite guilty to then say, well, we're going to change that now, and the children are going to spend, for example, half the time with me. And that really poses a threat to a lot of mothers, and what that means in terms of, well, who am I now? If the kids are with dad half the time, what do I do with my time, and who am I?
My sister found that recently because she separated amicably, and they sort out the arrangements. But it is very much, you used to be around your kids all the time, then all of a sudden they're gone, you know, and you go, okay, well, what do I do with this now?
Well, this is it. I mean, someone said to me the other day, I didn't have children to only spend half my time with them. I want to spend all my time with them. Understandably so. But you've got two people who are no longer living together who both feel exactly the same way. And so it's about sorting that out, trying to come to some sort of solution that everybody can work with. Ideally, that's the ideal scenario, because that has to be better for the children in almost all cases.
And it has to be balanced with, well, you have to work still.
Yeah.
You know, so the hours that you're split between each other, you know, no doubt at that point, potentially both parents, if they're not already working, both have to go back to work.
Yeah,
so you're lessening the time that you can spend with the kids.
Yeah.
The kids obviously go to school as well if they're at that age. So it's all lessening, isn't it? And working out then the balance between the hours that are left over from doing all that.
It's very much a domino effect. So it won't just be about the arrangements for the children, like you say. It will then be about, well, having to go back to work if not already working, perhaps working less if you're working overtime to take on more care of the children to enable the other person to go out to work. And so it really is an all-encompassing issue that needs to be gently unpicked if possible and put back together.
Can I just add, actually, you can, if anyone's got questions, you can write us a Facebook message and we can bring it up and we can obviously ask. Well, we've got two experts in the room. Make use.
If you've been like a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home dad, then you've broke down, but then you've got to go and pay for your bills of your new home. You know what I mean? That's the other flip side, isn't it? You've had to go to working full time, and then say if me and Kate split up, me and my wife, and we get separate houses and all this. What also that was my family, that was my nan's house, and it's our house now. We're both on the deed and whatever. If we left now, what would say I choose to leave? Never mind, she kicks me out. I choose to leave. What would happen at that house then? Would I give her the house, or would I have to be bought out of the house?
It really
and that's
depends.
a big question. But
It is a big question, and there's no one answer when it comes to finances. Starting point is always going to be to look at what you have actually, and to be open about what there is. So you've got a house, was your nan's house, was inherited. There's a bit of a flag there for me thinking about that already. That could be an issue, something to discuss. But to look at what you've got. So we're talking about your houses, what's in your bank accounts, pensions, what your earnings are, whether you've got any investments, and there are forms to that we fill out to help with all of this stuff. And then the next question is, what do we do with it? And the starting point has to be well, what are the needs? If you and your wife have equal needs, because you're both the kids are going to be with both of you an equalish amount of time, it doesn't have to be an equalish amount of time, then you both have the same kind of housing need. we look at stuff like, what's your mortgage capacity? What can we achieve with the assets that are there? Sometimes it's starting with, right, what can't we achieve? Putting that to the side, managing expectations, and then looking at kind of what's left and what we can do. But generally, we start with a position of, right, what do these parents, what do this couple need? Whether they're children or not, actually, but what do these people need, and how are we going to achieve that? So it might be that one of you keeps that house and another of you buys a different house. It might be that one of you has to rent for a while. It might be that it gets sold and the equity gets split. There are loads of different ways of dealing with assets. And, as for children arrangements, really, the more that people can try and agree these things, you tend to get better outcomes for families. And that's where kind of our involvement as well. We're not here to around money to make things difficult. It's to try and work out what can be achieved and bringing everybody together to make the best for a family arrangement moving forward, and that has to be in everybody's interests.
And just with it, and don't forget, these are all just off the cuff questions.
Yeah.
But it's like, say, like me and my wife, we both paid the same amount of mortgage. Would I have more rights, or would she have more rights? Or because I think that's where it becomes entitlement, doesn't it? Even though we've paid the same, it's, well, this was my Nanny Silver and Grandad Mike's, but that's emotion, not business, isn't it?
It can be. Inheritance is a weird one, so I'm going to park that a little bit.
Yeah.
Generally, if it's around a family home, generally you're looking at that family home being available for division to the both of you, and as I say, trying to meet your needs. I've lost my train of thought now, which is embarrassing to admit on live podcast. But
I think when it comes to, if I paid X towards the mortgage, I paid 2/3 and you paid 1/3,
Yes.
but I paid the gas bill that one time, etc. The bottom line is, you're married, you're building a home for your family through your joint endeavours. So to then look back on that and say, well, on the 23rd of March 2019, I paid the whole mortgage that much, so I should have more equity. It doesn't work like that. It's about need, what the assets are through your combined efforts throughout the marriage.
I still get asked this question. Thank you for picking that up. I still get asked this question a lot. Somebody that says, well, I own the business. She's never put anything into it.
Yeah.
Why should she get anything out of this now? Never done a hard day's work in her life. Been married for 30 years. And it's like, but the contribution is equal, and it has been viewed as a matched contribution for years. When you marry and you say I do, you are entering into a partnership. It is that kind of a contract. I think that element of marriage, that reality, isn't actually well known, but it does exist. The financial claims, and kind of when we're talking about dividing houses, it all comes off the back of saying that you want to be married in the first place. Those claims exist because of your marriage, and therefore your contribution, for some people there will be an exceptional contribution, but we're talking very, 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 very exceptional by somebody. I was talking to a King's Council the other week, who said, £300 million contribution, that might be special enough. Might be. So for the majority of people, it doesn't matter what you've done within that relationship, paying the mortgage, looking after the kids, it's going to be viewed as you've had a proper contribution to that relationship.
I think some people class a contribution as just money as well, but it's not. It's time. So for you to be able to go and build that business or put that money in to pay that mortgage, what was the other person doing or sacrificing or carrying on to enable you to do that and go forward?
That's right. And it often comes around to a question around pensions. This is where we get asked it loads, actually, that often it can be the wife that doesn't have the biggest pension because the husband's been working, she's had periods of maternity or whatever if they have children, and the same argument goes. You're looking at a pension sharing order to even out the contributions that both of you were able to make during the term of the marriage. It's not a science. There is an art to it, and you do have to kind of look at. There are so many different factors to consider. I'd
never even considered a pension, to be quite honest, in terms of that would be something you'd split, because you do feel like not feel like, you do put, it comes out your wage and goes into that. Look, it's like kind of a savings account that's in your name, you know, but it's right. It should be, because you are both contributing to it in some way.
So those are the easier conversations to have with people that take that view. Not everybody does.
That's I can imagine.
And I imagine, once again, with separation, it's great if you just go, you know what, cheers for the last 20 years, but but a lot of the time, because emotions involved, isn't it? And emotion doesn't always make for logical thinking.
Very much so.
And that's when it's hard, isn't it? Because I was out with someone the other day, and he says, I didn't see it coming, Kev. I thought we were happy. And she's left me. And that's when it's that big boom moment. There hasn't been an affair. There hasn't been. It was just, she doesn't love me anymore. I still love her. And then there's two guys in that situation. One who goes, well, sodder, let it go. And there's the other guy who can't let it go. And, you know, that's tough, because your world has ended. And then once again, we don't know where we stand. Well, do I just give it a all? Because I want it to be happy. She can have everything. I'll just move in with my mum. And there's other people who are very spiteful. And, well, if she doesn't want me, I'm going to ruin her.
Yeah. I think separation is a process, and the way you feel on day one won't be the same as how you feel a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year down the line. And I think that's why it's important, when you're ready and as early as you can manage to have that conversation, is to speak to somebody, an expert who knows what they're talking about, before you make any sort of rash decisions out of, you know, that in the scenario that you just gave, oh, do you know what, just let her have it. 2 months later, 3 months later or more, he might realise that was not necessarily the best decision. But, you know, once the ink is dry on that order, what's done is done. There's no reversing out of it. And so it's a difficult door to open, and you know, understandably so. But I think the best piece of advice that I could give to anybody who's going through a separation, divorce, issues with their children is get some advice. Don't wait until, you know, someone's hit the nuclear button or the bomb's gone off or the horse is bolted, whatever analogy suits the situation best. Get some advice and start to think rationally. Okay, what are the things that I can deal with here that I think I could have a conversation with my partner about, or, you know, trying to compartmentalize things and just work your way through them and take a look at each thing when you're ready and say, do you know what, I think I could probably look at that. I think I could probably request my pension and just see what the position is. Or I think I might be able to sit down with them and say, would it be all right if the kids come to mine this weekend because my parents are visiting, whatever the case may be. But don't sit on it. Get that early advice, know what your rights are and your responsibilities, and then you can start to make some constructive decisions rather than trying to wade through it on your own, blind, without any guidance. Because often what happens is people become entrenched in their positions. I want it my way, I'm not doing it your way. And then it all has become so bitter that we then have, frankly, a hell of a job trying to sort it out once it's all got it's gone a bit too far down the road sometimes, and it can be very, very difficult.
I imagine that is difficult. You know, and what we were saying earlier about, like, well, I'm mom, I'm dad, and when you feel like that's been taken away from us, we all had a feeling of that for the lockdown, didn't we? Well, if I'm not a bricklayer, who am I? And if I'm not a boxing coach, well, who am I? And once your identity is taken away, it's a very lonely place, isn't it? Because you're thinking, well, I'm dad. It doesn't mean I can't be Kev as well. Or just because I'm mom doesn't mean I can't be a businesswoman as well. And it's that step into something, isn't it? Well, what else am I if I'm not just this?
And I think it's at a time, you know, with any breakup, it's at a time where there are just lots and lots of those questions at the same time. If you're not quite sure what's happening to the house, or you're not quite sure what your hours of working are going to be, or quite sure where the children are going to be, it just makes those emotions and that kind of feeling of isolation and change a whole lot bigger. I mean, one of the first things that I do in I'd say every conversation it's got to be the exception if I don't, is to encourage people to seek counselling services, so to go to their GP, talk about what they're going through, because you need that support around you. You know, you need your friends around you, you need a family around you, but actually sometimes people also need that professional support where they can talk very openly about what those kind of feelings are and how it's affecting them. I mean, we describe it as being akin to a bereavement process.
Yes,
really.
I was just going to say that.
And I think people going through that process don't always realise that that's the roller coaster they're going to be on, to a greater or lesser extent. Even with separations that are very amicable, there will be an element of that kind of loss and anger and change and, you know, grief.
Yeah.
So at one point you love that person, and at one point you plan for a better tomorrow. It might just not have never turned up. You know what I mean? But at one stage, most of us, you know, because once again, there's always good and bad people, but most people, when you start that relationship, you're starting for the right reasons.
Yeah.
You're starting it, we're going to do this forever and ever. You know what I mean? That's what me and my wife would say, ever and ever. And then for whatever reason, it hasn't worked, or someone has done something, or circumstances haven't fell in your favour. And as I said, I think that's the hardest ones when you hear, I thought we were all right. And when you hear that, you're thinking, something's been going on for so long, but we're oblivious to it sometimes, under our own noses, aren't we? You're not cuddling as much, you're doing this, you're doing that, and then all of a sudden, reality's hit you in the face. And then what do you do with it?
And I think, you know, again, it's part of our initial conversation when we're talking about separation. Are there prospects of reconciliation here? What have you done? You know, we refer people out to counselling services to see if there's, you know, anything left in a relationship. It's not for everybody, but we do always have to, you know, it's our responsibility to make sure that once you start that wheel of certainly divorce going, that it's the right decision to make at the right time. You know, both parties won't always be in the same place at the same time on that decision, but you want there to have at least been that opportunity if there's any spark left in a relationship. But you're right, it is very, very difficult.
Let's say two people have separated, and one's now moved out. They're going through that divorce procedure, but maybe they have a joint bank account where all their money goes in from wages, whatever. Would they be allowed to then still go into that bank account and go, well, I've still got to live, so I still need to pay bills, but it's a joint account. So where, you know, what would kind of happen in that situation?
I think it's one of those conversations that the earlier you can have it, as Shona was saying, the better, and the more realistic and practical you can be about it, the better. So I would start with budgets, right? What's coming out of this account? What do we need to go into this account to cover our bills and all of the rest of it?
So if you had a mortgage between two people, you'd still both be liable for that mortgage payment as well, wouldn't you?
Yes, but it's not always the case that both people continue to contribute to the mortgage. So again, it's a good reason to have that kind of very practical conversation if you can manage to do it. Otherwise, you know, these are conversations that we start off with. You know, whilst we're going through this very rocky, very uncertain bit, very emotional bit, what can we do to keep things the same? What agreements have we got? You know, what money's coming in to make sure that nobody feels like there's a loss of security or that they feel vulnerable. And these are the kind of very early stage conversations that people can have between them, you know, following a separation. To be very practical about it.
So I've heard with like some of my friends, and it's like, well, I've moved out, Kev. I'm paying for my new digs, paying for all my bills, but I'm still paying off the mortgage for my kids to live in the family house.
Yeah.
And is that common? Is there a way to protect someone from that?
It is common. It is. Yeah, you know, there are plenty of people that are struggling to keep two households going, and the answer is that you have to try and encourage there to be a conversation about the wider financial position as soon as possible, because that kind of outlay, I mean, let's face it, at the moment, for the majority of people, cannot keep happening. It's really difficult. We have some people that put themselves into, you know, even more difficult financial circumstances because they're doing just that. And it's where you want to either try and, you know, look at mediation as an option to start having these discussions if you don't want to go down a, you know, a lawyer-led route. So use a mediator to start having those very practical discussions, use lawyers to start having those discussions. If somebody won't engage with you, you might have to look at court proceedings, because the longer it goes on, sometimes the more difficult it can be to undo the position you've put yourself in.
I was just about to say that from a sort of strategic lawyer standpoint, the difficulty with if a position becomes entrenched or it's established over time, the person who is benefiting from that is then able to rely on what we call, you know, the status quo position. Well, this is working, why should we change it? And that's true of financial arrangements for children. And so you're automatically, if you then decide you want to change that and do something different, you're automatically on the back foot, because you're arguing, well, why do we need to change things now? Why is that better? Who does it benefit? And so that, again, it's so important to get that advice early on before you back yourself into these kind of corners where you're, you know, in that situation, you're paying for your own place and all the bills, but you're also funding a mortgage. And before you know it, you've put yourself in a position of real financial hardship. And
then all of a sudden, I don't know, you fall off a ladder and you can't go to work.
Yeah.
Then you're falling behind on two lots of bills. And that's a hard place to be in, isn't it? Because you've lost everything, you can't provide, and you feel like a bad person when you're already doing too much anyway. And as you say, Dad, well, you've got to get a job because the bills need paying for, or our daughter needs shoes. And you go, I'm struggling myself here. It's hard, isn't it? And as you say, as that status quo, I'm comfortable. Because another question I was going to ask you is like with child maintenance and stuff like that. Because I know so many people who have done it like, well, I'll just give her or him, you know, so-and-so a month. Then all of a sudden, there's no paper trail of doing it. Then you look like a deadbeat because you haven't done anything. So would you kind of have something like that in paper, or a paper trail of some description? Or
I would, at the very least, what I usually say to clients is, if you're sending money by bank transfer, then you put the reference on the transfer as child maintenance or money for the kids, whatever the case may be, just something so it can show up on a bank statement that you say that's what it's been sent for. Because it is difficult, you know, all these sorts of things then become or can become issues later down the road where, you know, people claim they haven't had any maintenance or weren't paying enough maintenance. So something simple like that, putting a reference that says what you're sending the money for, can bottom that out and deal with that quite quickly. Well, here's the statement with all of the references: maintenance. Equally, I'd encourage people to put child maintenance, so it can't be argued that it's actually spousal maintenance.
Spousal maintenance is the payment from a higher earner to a lower earner to even out the difference in incomes. So sometimes it can be for a period of time to allow for adjustment. So your example of, you know, one spouse doesn't work and the other one might need to pay part of their income just for the benefit of the spouse to kind of make that a bit easier. Worst case scenarios, it can be for the rest of joint lives. So these are quite important orders to be aware of. I was going to say, just around kind of the payment of things, some of the most amicable and smooth divorces I've had are from people that come to me even before separation and say, I'm thinking about separating. I know that this is going to be really difficult for my spouse. I need to know what I need to do. I need to know how I can make this easier. I need to know the conversations I need to have. I need to know what they might say in response to this. And they're so well prepared that, you know, there's not a lot that can really rock them. They're then sort of able to deal with the emotional fallout of the relationship breakdown, but they've had the information, they've put the stuff into place, they know what they're doing. they know what words to offer to provide some more certainty or comfort or security or whatever it needs to be, but they also know their boundaries around those things. So it's something that actually, again, people might not know that lawyers do that, but we do talk to a lot of people pre-separation when they're thinking the relationship's over.
Absolutely. You don't have to be served with court papers and then you go and see a lawyer.
No, not at all.
You know, the as I've said, and I can't stress it enough, and I'll stress it again, the earlier you can get advice, the better.
And sometimes you might get the advice and thinking, no. You know what I mean? Sometimes, because you have these impulsive things and you might get all this thing and going, well, it's not as bad as I thought. You know, she does me head in, but it's not worth all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people might decide that actually it's better to be in than out. And you know, that's fine too. It's about making choices and informed decisions.
Decisions.
Knowing what your options are.
You know, look, because I was laughing about this the other day. Because you don't have the marriages, the weddings that they used to. That's time I see everyone now is at a funeral. So we used to see them at a wedding or at a christening, or you know,
just showing your age, really.
But I've been to like a couple this year. I was like, bloody hell. But I've got friends who've been with their partners for 20, 30 years. But like marriage isn't as popular as it used to be. To someone who isn't married but has been with a partner for 20, 30, 100 years, have they still got the same amount of rights as someone who is married? No.
In what respect? About money?
Money,
children.
Children, yes, they do. They have the same rights. There's no difference whether you're married or unmarried.
And that's really important to get across, isn't it? Especially gentlemen, there's no difference at all.
If you have parental responsibility, then you have the exact same rights, whether you're married, unmarried, living separately, living together, doesn't make a difference. Your legal rights are the same.
So I imagine that's a big shock.
Yeah, I think that it was to me when you said it earlier.
Because even if my name isn't on the birth certificate, but we all know that's my baby, DNA. So you've got as much right as if you were married to your partner.
So, you would need to acquire parental responsibility, which either can be done by agreement with the mother and putting your name on the birth certificate later on, or by court order, essentially. There are some other details around that, but to put it in a nutshell, you've either got it or you can acquire it.
Yes.
And so if you've got it, you already do have the same legal rights, and once you acquire it, you've got the same legal rights. There are no degrees of parental responsibility. From a legal standpoint, they are the same in every single way. The only difference is mother's parental responsibility is automatic, father's has to be acquired.
So I've known a lot of people, once again, who the relationship is broke and they haven't been able to see the child. And I'm thinking, as long as there's no physical harm to the mother or the child, no one's a deviant or no one's whatever, then they should have the same right to be able to, every agreed upon days, have a relationship with their child and or parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And wider family too, because when parents separate, it's not just necessarily the loss of one parent. If there is a complete fracturing of the parental relationship and they can no longer tolerate even being in the same room as each other or handing over the kids or working together to at least ensure the children are still seeing the other parent, they're also losing, as I said before, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of that. You know, it has a real knock-on effect. And I think the way in which I try and approach this is from the angle of the child rather than the parents. So one of the things I hear a lot from parents is my time, my weekend, my week. Yeah, during the holidays. And it's not, it's the child's weekend with that parent. It's the child's opportunity to take a holiday with that parent and to kind of take away those sort of possessive language when talking about children. Actually then opens up, I find, a different way of looking at this, which is through the eyes of the child, which is ultimately what this is all about. Because okay, you might be mad at dad or mad at mum, and you think in that moment, I know what will hurt them. I'm not going to let them see the kids. I'm not going to let them take the kids to Disneyland like I said I would before. You know, I'm not going to let them take them on that holiday or to that wedding or whatever the case may be. But if they just stopped for a moment and took a step back and just asked themselves, but that little boy or girl was so excited about that. Why would you take that away from them? Just, you think you're hurting the other person, but you're not. All you're doing is hurting the kids.
And I think that gets lost sometimes.
It does. It really does. And I think as the person who stands back and sees a lot of this happening, it's really sad. Really, really sad. Because I don't think I've legitimately come across more than the number of people I could count on one hand that do this on purpose. It's always subconsciously done or unintentionally done through anger, resentment. And it's really, really sad, because actually there are parents who I've seen who have come through a separation or a divorce really successfully shielding and protecting the children from this. And it starts with reassuring the kids, yes, we're separating, or yes, we're getting divorced, but this will not affect the way we feel about you or the time you will still get to see both of us.
And having routine around that as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, what works for one child won't necessarily work for another. So some parents are able to successfully go from living in the same home relatively quickly to equal time. You know, some parents can do that. In other situations, it might be the case that the parents have to move quite far apart from one another for various reasons, financial, jobs, etc. And so 50-50 isn't going to work. But they are able to agree, let's say, alternate weekends, and the parent who's moved away is able to spend a little bit more time during the holidays with the children. What works for one family won't necessarily work for another. But at the end of the day, I think if anybody's listening who has been in a situation where time has been removed with their children in retaliation for something, or anyone's listening who is willing to admit that they might have done that themselves, think about the impact on the children, because that's all that really matters at the end of the day. You know, the parents are there to protect the kids. And I think that's probably, the most powerful message I could deliver is ultimately look at it through the eyes of your kids.
And they're children, not weapons.
On that one parent saying you can't come and see your children, where would that father stand if he just turned, or mother, just turned up at school and said, I'm taking you with me? Where, you know, because you've got, no doubt happens.
Yeah, it does happen. Lots of things can happen in that situation. It depends on the school. Ultimately, from a legal standpoint, there's nothing stopping that parent, if they've got parental responsibility, from collecting the child and taking them. You know, they've got parental responsibility, legal rights, off they go.
I don't condone doing that. I'm just saying that it's kind of...
I was going to say, it's not necessarily the best way to approach things, because if let's say it's dad who's turned up to collect and he said to mum, can I pick up Sarah from school? And she said, no, she's got the dentist or she's got gymnastics or whatever, and you go and do it anyway. It's a red rag to a bull, you know it is. It's only going to go one way. And I know, because I see it all the time, it will be, that's it, you're not collecting again.
Yeah.
You're not having them this weekend. I can't trust you, etc., etc. In terms of what the school would do, jury's out on that one. Different schools do different things. Some schools won't intervene and they'll just say it's nothing to do with us. You know, there's no safeguarding issue. Off you go. Other schools might call the police, might call the other parent and ask them to come down and refuse to release the child until the other parent's there, and they basically said, you two sort it out between the two of you. We're not getting in the middle of this. Worst case scenario is someone could apply for an injunction against the other called a non-molestation order to prevent them from going near the kids' school. I mean, that is a sledgehammer to crack a nut type situation. Those injunctions should only be applied for in the rarest of circumstances.
But legally saying, there's no parent can turn around on either side and say you're not seeing your kids.
No.
Unless abuse or...
Well, yes, but...
if we put that aside and we imagine there are no safeguarding issues at all, legally, no. but they do. And it would be wrong to get into a situation where you're having a tug of war over the child on the doorstep or at the school, showing them up in front of their friends and the other parents, you know. So legally, no, but in reality, it is quite relatively easy to put those boundaries in the way. And I think a lot of fathers in particular think they have to accept that because they're not aware that actually neither of you get to dictate to the other on this. You either agree, or if you can't agree, then you need to try mediation or something similar, some form of process where somebody can sit down and try and talk the parents through this. Or the worst case scenario and the absolute last resort is with a court application.
Because you know that, what did you say, the order? The
Non-molestation order.
So if that, could you explain what that is, please?
Yes. So a non-molestation order is an injunction. So it's a civil remedy for somebody who is being harassed, be it directly, threatened, indirectly or directly over social media, text message, email, or to your face, coming to your property when it's unwanted, turning up at the children's schools and causing problems, etc. You can apply for a non-molestation order to prevent that person from doing those things. So, for example, a non-molestation order might say that you're not allowed within 50 metres of this person's house. You're not allowed to use threatening and abusive language towards them. You're not allowed to contact them by any means. And it's a time-limited order, so it's not just in place forever. It will be on a time-limited basis, and it's designed to protect somebody from unwanted behaviour.
And if that order is breached, the person that breaches it can then be arrested for the breach. That it becomes a criminal issue.
We've done shows on this before about domestic abuse, and what isn't often talked about is domestic abuse happens on both sides. And we've had a lot of men who've been domestically abused, but it's like, I believe the law only changed over a year. That they would always arrest the man. It's like, well, if she's up to you with the iron, what did you do to make her hit you? And that's criminal, because I've heard about horrible scenarios where the woman has made the man's life, turning up while he's been working on the road and tormenting him and abusing him and basically stalking him. But a lot of the time it's a woman. What you're going to do? You haven't got to tolerate that, because that is wrong on any side of the coin, isn't it?
Absolutely. And our colleague Rhian Gray, she specialises in cases where there's domestic abuse. So I mean, hopefully everybody can see we work quite collaboratively as a team.
Good.
Sort of crossing over, with what each other do. We work on a lot of cases together. Karen deals with cases where there's an element of domestic abuse. So whether that's because the initial instruction has been about finances and we find that there's been financial abuse, or there's been physical abuse or emotional abuse, whatever it is, her expertise in that and her connections with local charities and refuges are just absolutely fantastic. But you're right, it does go both ways. It cannot be ignored whichever way it is. Certainly that's not something that you're going to hear from us. It's a woman, you can't do anything. It's just not acceptable. Abuse is never going to be acceptable. And we're going to be the first people to say that behaviour has to stop, and here are things that you can do about it. Here are some options, really practical things, not just sort of legal remedies. But we have these conversations more frequently than I think we would like to, and would like to be having them.
With that molestation order, if I said that right?
Non-molestation order.
Do you find that mainly, or do you find both parties apply for that? And do you think both parties get it as easy as the other one does?
I find, are you asking if it's mainly men or women who apply for
yes,
that?
and is it
Mainly
easy
women.
for a man to put it onto a woman, or is it easy for a woman?
It shouldn't make a difference. The test is whether or not it's necessary, because there's an immediate risk of harm, and it shouldn't matter whether it's a man or a woman that's applying for it. It's a form of self-help. So you don't necessarily need for there to have been criminal proceedings or police involvement in order to apply for this order, albeit it would increase the prospects of succeeding in getting that order made by the court if you did. But in terms of, whether there's a greater prospect or a lesser prospect of getting an order like that because you're a man, I would say absolutely not. It comes down to the behaviour at the end of the day. And if you need protecting from somebody, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman.
Would that have a knock-on effect in terms of you seeing a child if there's one in place?
Yes.
Yeah, so it kind of stops all contact.
This is something that I'm actually raising at the moment with the West Midlands Private Law Committee, which is that I'm increasingly seeing non-molestation orders being applied for and granted, and then being treated as a sort of quasi no contact order when it comes to children. It is not a no contact order. It's a non-molestation order designed to regulate the behaviour from one party to another. But what I see a lot of is that it's then relied on, well, you can't see the children because I've got this non-molestation order and it says you can't contact me, you can't do this, you can't do that. But actually, if you read what these orders say, they should say, if there are children involved, you're not to contact the other person by these means, other than for the purposes of arranging contact for the children. I saw an order recently that didn't say that, and it should.
So I'm trying to explain. Say me and my wife, could I then phone my daughter if my daughter had her own phone, or would it have to go through a grandparent? Say,
No.
You've got to go to nanny so we can meet. Or...
Yeah, if your child has their own phone and there's a non-molestation order in place, I'm going to keep calling it a non-mol. That's the shortened version. If there's a non-mol in place, and that is not prohibited by the order, then yes, you can. That's not a breach. It should.
I think if anybody has them and you're not sure what it means, it's best just to get it checked out, because if you're in breach, you're then in breach, and it's just better for the sake of it saying to somebody, if you're not sure, what does this actually mean? What can I do? What can I not do? And to understand how that interacts with your relationship and arrangements to see your children.
What you were saying before, we were saying about like a marriage and a relationship, and you were saying if we're not married but we've been together for 20, 30, 100 years, my relationship, my child doesn't change, but if we're not married, the pension and the house will change.
Money's different.
Money's different
for people that have lived together and that haven't been married. The protections, the range of orders that are available are much, much more limited. There's just not the same arrangements for around money. So you're looking at ownership of property. You're looking at what's in joint names, what's in separate names. Generally speaking, and again, it's always a case for taking advice, but generally speaking, if you've got things that are in your names, they are yours. If you've got things that are in joint names, we have to look at the type of ownership. But there are some really, really complicated legal arguments to try and shift those things, and that some people try and run those. So it can get very, very messy when you haven't been married, actually, because there's not that legal framework around entitlement, for want of a better word. Does
that come more down to, well, I've paid the mortgage but I bought the settee?
That's right, it can do. And if you imagine needing to go through 30 years worth of bank statements to say, oh gosh, what actually did you contribute? And that's where contribution can become a much more relevant factor, actually, at the end of a cohabiting relationship.
So you're better off married.
For some people, you're better
if you're going to get divorced.
Yeah, I think it's another side of what I do, actually, and that is the wealth protection side of things. So for anybody that's going to start living with somebody, and if you're putting in unmatched contributions, if you're buying a property, cohabitation agreement, we have, as I said earlier, we've been acting for generations and generations of families. So we see classically parents giving one of their children some money to get them on the property ladder, and they move in with their boyfriend, girlfriend, and they split up, and there's nothing protected. Either parents don't get the money back, or they've just owned the property. They haven't put certain documents in place to try and protect that initial capital outlay. And cohabitation agreements, declarations of trusts, quite easy documents to put into place to protect any wealth that you're introducing into a relationship. Same thing for nuptial agreements, actually, but So before you get married, anybody that's got wealth, a business, kind of inheritance prospects should at least consider these types of agreements to regulate what would happen in the event of a divorce.
Because once you go into a relationship and you don't think, well, I love you, but you know, if it don't work out, you won't have nothing. It's a hard conversation because as a relationship starts, you picture forever, don't you?
You do.
But you've got, if you are worth a bob or two, or if it has been passed down.
Somebody had a great response to this actually, and I can't remember who it was, but we were having this conversation the other day about whether prenuptial agreements, so agreeing what you're going to do with the money before you get married, is really unromantic. And somebody said, it might have been Phil actually, said something like, what's more romantic than letting somebody know that you're marrying them for them and not their money?
Yeah.
And I thought
that's very beautiful.
Really good way of putting it there, and I never looked at it that way. Was, you know, I'm in it for you and not because I'm seeing pound signs.
I think there is that. I mean, you're right. It's a tricky conversation. You know, again, we work with quite a lot of people nice and early on to sort of to start introducing that, and it's it's one of those things where the earlier you can make it about the wealth protection rather than the person that you're in a relationship with, it becomes a whole lot easier. Like if you can say to somebody, well, you know, this is what my family's expectation is. It could be you or it could be anybody else, but this is what needs to happen. It's then not about the individual. It's not about that particular relationship. It's just acknowledging that, you know, a lot of marriages end in divorce, and you do have an opportunity using nuptial agreements to try and take some control, more control when you're in a happy place over what should happen. And so that if a relationship does break down, again, you know, going back to emotions, you can focus on those emotions. You don't have the added heartache and concern about, you know, who's going to get the house or what's going to happen to the inheritance that we've had or whatever that is. There are things that people can do.
My family, my grandparents worked so hard to build this.
That's it. Yeah.
So in their memory, can we leave that aside? And if something does happen, the children will always be looked after, but
that's it. Exactly.
Not yourself, say. But I've got to ask it as well for people who listen, like, you know, with like same-sex marriages, when they break up, as you know, like, because obviously it's like in that stereotypical mother and husband role, like say it's two men or two women who've been married, do they have the same rights as a heterosexual couple? And because it's changed there that people can get married, but they should have the same rights to see their children, shouldn't they? Does that make sense?
I mean, in terms of finances,
in finances and in childcare and
in terms of finances, they're exactly the same legislation that works whatever the relationship is. So it's very, very easy from finances, and I think you'll say the same thing.
Yeah, from the children, there's no difference at all. The only difference is, again, a question of parental responsibility. Has the other parent, so if you've got a situation in which, let's say, for argument's sake, there's two birth mums, but one is biological birth mum and the other is not, then it's about checking first that the mother who was not the biological birth mother has acquired the parental responsibility. But again, even if that's not the case, or with two fathers, if that's not the case, it doesn't mean that you can't then get it and apply for PR in the same way that you would in any other situation. Surrogacy is a bit more difficult. That would be opening up an entirely different can of worms. That's quite a lengthy conversation in of itself. But again, if anybody's listening and is in that scenario where they're considering surrogacy, for example, I'm happy for them to contact me and I can talk them through that separately as well.
I mean, once again, I've said it ever since it is so different to keep logic and emotion separate, isn't it? But if there are children involved, try to realise just because your relationship with your partner has ended, you've still got a relationship with that child, and that should be sacred, shouldn't it? On all three parties, or as many parties are in the mix. And you know, because you don't love that person, as long as you're alive and that child's alive, hopefully there can be some form of relationship.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, something that I ask clients is you're going to be involved with this person for the rest of your life because you've got children together. do you really want to be the subject of a conversation by one of your kids where they're saying to their future husband, wife, what are we going to do about my parents at our wedding because they're just awful? I can't have them in the same room. I don't want them sat at the top table together. You know, all these horrible conversations because they just can't behave themselves. It's embarrassing. You know, do you really want to be the subject of those conversations? It doesn't need to be that way. You know, it really, really doesn't. And it's about being able to recognise sometimes that perhaps the way you're behaving now is not the way you would have behaved had the marriage not have, or the relationship broken down. And at the end of the day, is what you're doing now going to make your children happy in the short or long term?
Or yourself?
Well, quite. And if the answer to that, if you're really honest with yourself, is no, it's not too late to stop and do things differently. It's never too late to turn these things around. But the bottom line is, I think if you asked 99.9% of children what they wanted, the first thing they'd say is, I want mum and dad to get back together, or mum and mum, or dad and dad. I want my parents back together. As adults, we know that's not possible in most cases, but that's what they'll say. Very childlike response. I want them to get back together. And so what's the next best thing? And it's down to the parents to make that happen for them. They deserve nothing less. And it is possible to do it, and to do it really well, as long as everyone's prepared to just park the anger and put it somewhere else to make the right decisions for their kids.
So last thoughts in, girls, before I ask you to name me a quote or a saying. Last thoughts, what would you say, like, for anyone out there who's in the mix of it, or they, either they're in the mix or they're seeing the writings on the wall, you know, what would you give?
Wait, I don't know, this might be a bit too philosophical, but I might take one from Sinead O'Connor recently, which I saw in a documentary about her after she passed away, which was, they tried to bury me, they didn't know I was a seed.
Oh, beautiful. What a tragic life she has.
On.
I wouldn't try. I'll go with that classic
that
one.
documentary.
I'll go with the classic one. Honesty is the best policy, because I think whatever you're doing, whatever walk of life you're in, whether you're coming to see a lawyer about child arrangements or divorce, whether you're having a conversation with your spouse and saying, this is the end of the road, you can't go too far wrong if you're just honest. It might be really hurtful, but it's always the best way. And we can do stuff with honesty. As lawyers, we can do things with honesty. So that would be mine. I can't attribute it to anybody or a documentary. That would be mine.
Well, girls, thank you ever so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Now, next week we're joined by Peter Upton, Mad Pete from the Priory. Great friend, one of my best friends in boxing. He's going to talk about his life and beating cancer. So I look forward to catching up with the old pal. Well, guys, until we see each other next time, I want you all to take care of yourselves and each other. Ta-ra a bit.
Listen.
And that's a wrap for another show. But if there are any comments or messages that you would like us to read out for our next podcast, please be in touch. There are also lots of different organisations at the bottom of this page, and hopefully they can help you or someone you care about. Please share this to spread the word. Until we talk next time, ta-ra a bit.